Hey friends, here we are again, this time from Wendys Bar in Luperón, Dominican Republic. It's an icon for cruisers like us. And here, Tony and I have had many conversations, and with others. Tony, this is where it happens. This is where philosophy happens.
Well, yeah, it's absolutely where it happens. You can hear, we got a football game going on, drinks are in hand, but when people gather in places where they gather at the end of the day, they talk about things that matter to them. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to have a conversation in a place,
It's difficult.
and including you.
It's difficult.
And there's all kinds of things going on, but that's what gives us the food for thought. That's what makes us real. And philosophy can be done in a classroom, it can be done in an office, it can be done sitting on a mountaintop. And there's plenty of examples of those. But that's not the philosophies we're talking about. We're talking about lived stuff, where the rubber hits the road, making a difference in people's lives.
The old day, under the portico, in the square.
Exactly.
Where it happens. So, last episode we kind of gave a large, the 10,000 foot view of Stoicism. And man, we got a lot to unpack there.
You got it.
But as I was thinking about that, I remembered that you had done a lot of work with existential sense making. Which is kind of an interesting concept. And how does that fit with what we're doing with Stoicism and our life well lived?
Sure. So that's a great question, because I didn't come to Stoicism right away. I came to existentialism first. And I've got a story to tell you, because I think, so here I was a new PhD student, a late in life PhD student. I didn't plan on going back to school. That's not part of this story. That's for another day. And I went into an academic's office. Here's a mentor of mine teaching me some philosophy. And I had this idea about how I was going to write this massive paper. It would take 4, maybe 6 months to write. And he thought the idea was great, but he leaned over and he said, "I think you've got more in you." I didn't really know what he meant, because he's a pretty simple guy. And he came to me and he said, "I think if you combine sense-making and existentialism, that's where you want to be." Now at this point, I didn't know what either of those things were.
Let me back up a little bit. Sense-making, what is sense-making?
So that's the key here. So many of us understand what existentialism might mean, but sense-making is a bit weird. So sense-making is, Carl Weick is the guy that came up with sense-making. And what he said, I think the best way to describe it is, he said, "How will I know what I think until I see what I've said?"
Interesting.
And what he was getting at was that when we try to figure out what's going on around us on an ongoing basis, we're always sort of thinking to the past a little bit to figure it out. But the problem is, the past, we sort of change how we think about it on an ongoing basis. So sense-making is not based on accuracy. It's not based on everything being perfect, the way it happened exactly. It's based on how we think, feel, and understand. It's based on plausibility. But the real way to get at it is, how do I know what I think until I see what I've said? And that's the key. So sense-making is all about how we make our way in the world on a moment-by-moment basis from a social, psychological viewpoint.
Right.
That sounds all highfalutin, but it's really pretty basic. And what it means is that we continually take our past and try to figure out what it means now. I
think all of us do that, right?
Exactly. And sometimes we do that with a lot of knowing and a lot of gravitas, and sometimes we don't at all. Sometimes it just happens we have no damn idea what went on.
We call it intuition. Where we intuitively know something, and what's the basis of that?
So if we were talking in a classroom, we'd be talking about ontology and epistemology.
Of course we would. I hate those words.
Yeah. I don't like them much either. In fact, I like to blur them so much I get in trouble when I do it. So what sense-making gives us is a way for people to understand how they get through their lives on a moment-by-moment basis. But on the other hand, what existentialism gives us is the big projects, meaning. Why do we do something? What do we set our sights on? What do we put meaning on to the point where it matters? It matters to us so much that we'll strive, we'll think about these things, we'll come to conclusions about them, keep going forward. So existential sense-making is a weird combination of these two things.
It sounds remarkable to me, and it actually not being the academic that I'm not. But it makes sense to me.
Plenty academic.
But it makes sense to me. Okay. So what I think, so we combine Luperón motorcycles. Just gotta wait a minute. Backstory.
Yeah.
Backstory. So you remember I told you that early in my life, I was a U.S. Navy hospital foreman.
Indeed.
And my school was at Balboa Naval Hospital. This is 1980.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
we would actually have to stop class for the planes coming in to land in San Diego. So this is not foreign to us.
No. People in Luperón like their motorcycles and they like them wild.
So we have a conversation, we pause for a little bit, and then we pick the conversation back up.
Yeah.
Okay, so where were we?
So, yeah.
Existential sense making. So the existential part, that sounds very much to me as we talked about in our Stoic thing, as virtue, courage, vision.
Oh my goodness, you got it. The dovetails are so amazing, and that's how I came to Stoicism. Because as I started to read Stoics, I realized this sounds vaguely familiar to me, and because I like to put things together. I don't just like to categorize things, I like to see how they fit together. I'm a kid at heart, I still like Lego.
Sure.
Yeah. So I just play Lego with philosophy, that's how we do it. So what happened was I started reading the Stoics and I realized, oh my God, my work in existentialism fits here. And yes, there is virtue in existentialism. We've been taught in many cases that existentialism is almost, it strips meaning in some ways out, and then it becomes almost nihilistic, like we don't care about anything except just doing it.
Right, but there is a distinction between existentialism and nihilism.
You got it. And if there wasn't, to be honest with you, I would not write in the existentialist field.
Right.
I'm not a nihilist. I can't live that way. I don't think anyone can, to be honest.
I don't really think you can either.
Yeah. Meaning
I hope
matters.
you don't either, but
No, and if you are leaning towards nihilism, stick with us. We'll drag you back from the edge.
Come on. because what are we doing here? We're working on living a life well lived.
Exactly.
And having done so,
yes.
Again, back to Stoicism.
So
having done what we've set out to do,
yes,
the best way we can, and having envisioned what it is at the end.
No.
Where can we look back and say, I regret this or I regret that?
Regrets are such a problem. I mean, Nietzsche, those of you that lean towards nihilism think that Nietzsche's your man. He's not. He wasn't much of a nihilist, actually. But Nietzsche told us, he said, regrets, if he could use the word sin, he would have used the word sin. He couldn't, because he declared God is dead and we have killed him. That's a different discussion. but Nietzsche would never accept regret. He thought it lessened you, it weakened you. I think regret can be useful if it's done right.
Okay, let's put this in the architecture of Seneca.
Yes.
Right? So
yes.
How would he approach his regret? Because I know you've read much more of Seneca than I have.
Well, I don't know about more, but so here's the problem with regret globally, and then we can talk about the Stoics more specifically. The problem with regret is if it's paralyzing, if it holds you in the past, if you get into the doom loop of saying, what if, oh, I shouldn't have, this sounds a whole lot like something that we might even clinically define as a psychological condition in the modern world. So if regret takes you to the past and holds you there, no bueno, that's no good. But on the other hand, if regret, as I like to define regret, loosely paralleling Seneca, not exactly,
right.
Okay? I'm not that smart, but loosely paralleling. I think regret happens when there was something that you desperately wanted to do, and you had the opportunity to do it, and you chose not to. That's where regret lives.
Yeah, it does. Okay, so this brings us back around. Everything. Back in my day, we used to say that the dinosaurs will come back.
Oh, yes.
Because everything comes full circle.
You got it.
All right, so with that, it brings us back into a Stoic principle.
Exactly.
I am in control of what happens here.
Exactly.
Right? So, and we've all had those experiences that we might label as regret. But when you add them up, they are, those experiences are that which make us who we are today.
Exactly. So when I was a young man, I didn't grow up with a whole lot of material goods, very simple upbringing. Fantastic upbringing, but a little bit harder than, say, my child gets nowadays. We tend to spoil our young ones and give them the things that we didn't have. But I was 10 years old. We didn't have a lot of books in our family, but I did get to go to the public library. And I'm a huge believer in public libraries. A huge believer in the Dewey Decimal System because it took me in places I never could have figured out. And I walked down those stacks and I found a section that was entitled Exploration. And I read incessantly. I read of solo sailors, of mountaineers, all the things I later did. And at 10 years old, I vowed in those library stacks that I would do shit that I thought mattered and I would find the opportunities to make it happen.
At 10 years old.
At 10 years old.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know where that came from. Like, I'm not laying any credit to that. That's just how it went down. But here's the benefit of that. I actually held true to that. So when I got a chance, I took it. And if I didn't know if it was a good or a bad idea, I took it anyway, just to find out. So I have relatively few regrets. All sorts of things I wish I had said to people, things I should have done better. Those aren't regrets. Those are just human failings that I tried to learn from. But
right. Now, just a moment for our listeners here. You see how these left turns, and if you can give us a count of how many left and right turns we take in these conversations, maybe we'll put a bonus out there for you.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so back to how's all that viewed? One, with the existential sense making.
Yes.
Woven in with the Stoicism.
Perfect question. Love to hear it. I've been thinking about this for about 15 years, solidly, probably a bit longer too, but with concerted effort. And here's how I think it works. Stoicism for me says to live a virtuous life, you have to accept what you're given, deal with it with a certain sense of grace, for lack of a better term, to take into account others around you in a civic-minded way, and to not be stuck in the past.
Okay, so to live a virtuous life,
yes.
Does that equal living a life well lived?
I believe it does. I don't know if you do. You're going to tell me in a minute. And I don't know if you do. I'd like to hear. So what do you think? Is a life well lived virtuous?
I don't know. How do you define virtue? How do you define that? In the last episode, it said number one, just be a human, right?
Yes.
Just be a human. You're killing me, man.
How do you define virtue? I don't know. Look, no one knows. But we can get some hints. We can do what's called intelligible contours. We can describe around something. If you can't describe what it is, you just talk around it enough that you get a good, clean picture of it.
Right.
And that's a time-honored philosophic principle.
Right. We talked about it's about community, right?
Yeah, community is a strong part of it.
And that is part of living a life well lived. It's part of it.
Yes.
We cannot look at our community.
It's a fantastic place.
But this is the community. We talked earlier, and it sounds pretty callous. A very stoic principle is again circling back around. You can't hurt my feelings. You can't make me mad.
Yep.
You can't make me sad. You can't make me sad. No. I mean, all those things can live within me.
Yes.
And who has control of those?
But, oh my God. So there lies freedom. Once you no longer believe that others control how you think and feel, once you accept the responsibility, it's a bit of a weighty one at first, but not forever. Then what happens is you're liberated. You can enjoy others' company. You can be in places where things happen. The unexpected isn't a problem. It's just another experience that you manage.
Okay, so virtue.
Virtue.
With that in mind, I'm still burdened with how I present myself.
Of course.
To a large degree.
Of course.
So that I don't put that burden of being hurt, being sad, being humiliated, being offended.
Exactly.
I'm not going to let you off this light. Where does that fit in your existential sense making?
Yeah. So I'm gonna quote a real philosopher now, not me, but a real philosopher. So Jean-Paul Sartre had a great story that he talks about here. And the great story that he tells, he talks about how we put on facades and how we act as something that we're not. And we can talk other details later, but the story I love, it's a bit of a tawdry one. Safe for children, but tawdry. He talks about a voyeur. He talks about a voyeur peeking through a peephole. He's looking through a keyhole into someone's room. I don't know what's going in there. I don't want to know. But he's looking in there. And here's what happens. Here's what Sartre describes. When the voyeur is looking through that hole and he's unaware of anything, he's just who he is. He's not thinking about who he is. He's not thinking about how he represents himself. He's not thinking about how others view him. He's just looking. But if you come up behind him and tap him on the shoulder, and the voyeur is now being watched, he no longer is just who he is. He's now someone who's been caught, maybe a deviant, maybe he's embarrassed, maybe he doesn't care, but he becomes something else. So here's the thing, when we present ourselves, when we do it, it's natural, it's normal. But if we're aware of it, we can do it in a way that's virtuous. Now, virtuous isn't only about being virtuous for others, and Sartre would agree with us. It's virtuous to us.
And that's where it matters.
True to ourselves.
That's where it matters.
So right back to Stoicism. If we recognize that we can be true to ourselves, that something isn't happening to us, it's happening. We are there.
Exactly.
But we are in control of how we think and feel about it, and then how we choose to respond or not.
And how it makes all the difference in the world.
It's the whole thing. So now we're getting to the brass tacks of it. Well, we've had Jean-Paul Sartre here, we had old Nietzsche, oh my God, we've had Seneca, the cast of thousands, okay? But here's what we actually have come to. We've come to some practical knowledge. So here we are in the bar, listen to the football game, the motorcycles are going by, we're talking some philosophy.
Tearing apart Dia del Muerte.
Yeah, and what we've got going on here is we're getting ready for some live music too. So, in the end, I like to think that be true to yourself is not something flighty, it's actually a very practical, applied way of working virtuously in the world. And when you can work virtuously for yourself, you become virtuous for others. Frankly, the world gets to be a better place. I don't know, is that where we should stop today, Mike?
I think you're right, it's getting a little noisy.
I got some thinking to do, man.
It's going to get noisier. All right, friends, so give us your thoughts. Give us a comment, ask a question, tell us something about yourself, just anything. Engage in this conversation because we need your help.
A dialogue's between two, a conversation can be thousands.
We can do this all day long, and but we want to include you. All right.
Until next time.